Committee on 18th of July, 11 o'clock. Welcome to those who are remotely. I think we have Councillor Mark Dimmery and Councillor Brian Smedley remotely. Is there anybody else?
Nobody else. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, I'll introduce myself. I'm John Bailey, County Councillor for Martock, Chair of the committee. I've already said welcome to everybody, including any members of the public who may be present. And I invite the members around the table to introduce themselves in a moment or two. To go through the formalities, the agenda and papers have been published on the Council's website in advance of the meeting. Could I kindly request that members and officers refer to the page numbers from the agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Today's meeting will run on a hybrid format with the committee members and key officers physically present in Dean House. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or to observe. The council may be recording the meeting to assist with the recording of our discussions. For further highlight, please only speak at the chair's invitation, switch on the microphone at the desk and say your name before speaking, and turn off the microphone after speaking. For those online joined by Teams, please turn off the microphones and cameras during not speaking. So I just asked the committee to introduce themselves. I've already said that I'm John Bailey, Chair of the committee. From my left, Hugh.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Hugh Davis. I represent Bullington, Watching, Southwood Brown, all the way down to Stradley. Thank you.
Francis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Francis Nicholson, member for Dalton and Exmoor, and I work for a site for 23 parishes.
Thank you, Francis. Claire.
Thank you. I'm Claire Dickin. I'm a committee officer and I'm supporting this committee on behalf of the Democratic Services team.
Thank you, Claire. On to David.
David Sturt. I'm a co-opted member of the staff.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair. Bobby Walton, co-opted member.
Sally.
Thank you, Chair. Sally Foster, co-opted member.
Sally.
Other people speak co-opted member.
Thank you.
Scott Aldridge, Head of Government and Democratic Services.
David
David Clark, Service Director for Government, Democratic and Legal Services and Monitoring Officer.
Thank you, David. And online, Martin and Brian.
Yeah, Martin Dimmery, Councillor for Froome West.
Thank you, Martin.
Brian Smedley, Councillor for Bridgewater South, checking in from Fort William, where I've just had some checks at Ben Nevis.
That's indeed very remote. Thank you, Brian. Apologies for absence.
None, bar one co-opted member. Thank you. All who
Thank you for that. Everyone else is here. Declarations of interest, item 2. Are there any declarations of interest that haven't been noted already? Minutes of the previous meeting, action sheet. I'll come back to the action sheet subsequently. Any comments on the minutes? Want a chance to read those? Is everybody in agreement they're a fair reflection of the meeting itself? Show a hand on that, please. You want? Yeah. Show that. That's not my microphone. You were at the meeting. Okay, so the minutes are duly passed. I will need to sign them at some point at the end of the meeting. The action sheet that we've had a workshop session. We're ready to go through that, and I'll just run through the areas that we've come up with. The workshop session will continue after this meeting to look at the work priorities over the next year. But for the purposes, I hope And we can see this. We picked up the matters arising, one of which was about the involvement of the HR director in the terms for the code of conduct for the officers, and that's been carried forward. We looked at the complaints report, and we're going to look at both quantity and quality. That will be subject to ongoing review. And as part of that, we'd like to refresh, or we look at refreshing the code of conduct training, and to involve Somerset Association of Local Councils. Both potentially with the support package that we would like to pull together, which I'll talk a bit more next, and also with attendance to this committee. The idea was to pull forward a support package which would be there to support local councils, as well as the sort of continuing desire to get them to adopt one code of conduct right across the county. The third area we talked briefly about was the having a corporate member on the hearing subcommittee, and that's being carried forward for review over the next year. And the final one was to look at the review of the structure, the natural structure of petition for a review, and have a discussion about where we feel that might be changed, stroke improved or amended. But it would be a review, and that's again carried forward to next year. Those were all the areas that we had on the action sheet from last time. So we'll move on to public question time. Are there any questions from members of the public? I understand there aren't. So we'll move on now to item 5, code of conduct complaints. The first element of that is the annual review. And I'd just like to invite David Clark to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. This is a retrospective look at our complaints, numbers, themes, and issues that we received in the sort of financial year 23-24. So you'll see within the report that overall we received 88 complaints, 88 code of conduct complaints, and that covers both Somerset Council and our 279 town, city and parish councils within the county as well. Although there were 88 complaints, some were the same complaints over the same incident. So in total, there were 59 separate incidents that were complained about throughout that year. And you see on the table on page 20 of the pack, it sets out the monthly breakdown of the complaints that we received. And you'll see that May was a bit of an exception, having received almost twice as many complaints as any other month, with the exception of February. And there was some concern at that time that the volumes were going to be higher than we had predicted pre-vesting, maybe. That as you'll see throughout the remainder of the year, we got down to a much more steady and familiar level where the average numbers per month were about 5 to 6, which again is more in line with what we predicted as a group of monitoring officers from the predecessor councils as to what we anticipated the volume would be following the reorganisation and restructure of local government in Somerset. Next element at 4.2 is just a measure on our acknowledgement practices. So we have a target to acknowledge any complaint received within 5 working days. And over the 12 months, we met that target of 88% of the occasions. The reasons for the failure to meet 100% just had annual leave, sickness, and that occurred early in the year. So the response rate did improve for the last 2 quarters. You know, looking at the report, it's up at 98% for the last 2 quarters of the year. In respect to the substantive response, again, we have a target of 20 working days from the submission of the complaint. And you'll see that target was achieved in 58% of the complaints that we assessed. That's on 51 out of 88 occasions. And again, the reasons for failing to meet that target, I think it's important to note that it's not wholly within the council or officers' control as to whether or not we meet that target. there could be requests for additional information. There could be, there is need to share any sort of proposed outcomes with the independent person. And there's a need for the subject member to respond in a timely manner as well. All those can contribute to our officers' ability to meet that 20 working day deadline. Regardless, I still believe it's an important target for us to strive to meet. And you will note in the monthly reports that I now, the quarterly reports that I now provide to members, we've introduced a reason for failing to meet that target. So just to give some further context. So where the failures have occurred, the reasons for those failures. In terms of trends and themes on page 22, 75% of all the assessed complaints concluded no further action was required. In 4 of those cases, that the complainant themselves elected not to proceed with the complaint or failed to provide any additional information when requested to do so. And further, 3 of the complaints were deemed to be outside the standards jurisdiction, and that's simply because the subject councillor was not acting in their role as an elected member at the time of the complaint occurred, therefore the code was not engaged. 12% of complaints resulted in further action being necessary, with 4 complaints still being in the assessment phase from last year. So they've not fully been included in our statistics. 16 complaints were upheld, a further 2 were partially upheld, although on 12 occasions no further action was deemed necessary. So a technical breach of the code was identified. It was not deemed that any further formal investigation was required or any formal action was necessary. You'll see in the next table that this breaks down the provisions of the code that are cited within the complaints. So you see the vast majority includes disrespect or bringing council into disrepute. I think it's important to note this. While we can take some value with these figures, and it's important to note that these are the provisions that are cited within the complaint, not necessarily any areas that have been established or upheld as part of the assessment. So, just in conclusion, Chair, this is the first annual report since vesting day and the creation of Somerset Council. I think it's important that we continue to monitor trends, but as part of a kind of retrospective look over the first year of activity, and hope you find the report valuable and take any questions.
Thank you, David. I'd remind you that we've already covered a number of questions already, gone through in the action plan from the workshop. Are there any additional comments, queries that we can cover? Francis, sorry. You were waiting with Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, a really helpful report. Thank you very much indeed. When I read it, I then went and looked at the appendix to the current set that we're looking at, we're later in the agenda, where I analysed it rather than by the kind of complaint. I analysed it by what's the sort of person who's complaining. And the majority are not councillors, rather more than members of the public complaining. I wonder whether it would be helpful, I don't think there's any point in revisiting it now, but in future, if we cross-referenced councillors complaining about each other with complaints about disrespect, and whether there is whether or not those complaints are upheld, and I have no idea whether they would be or not, but whether there is a training need to think about possibly not using complaints as a way of doing politics by, diplomacy or by any other means. I just wonder whether in future that would be something we might like to think about. Question.
Absolutely happy. We have that detail, we have that information, happy to pull that out, and it's part of another area of assessment or theme within any future reports.
Thank you, Francis.
Chair, the table or diagram shown on page 22 covers the complaints as received. Is it possible to have the same diagram for those 11 complaints in this report, at least, where further action is required? So we can actually see those which were looked at properly, sorry, not looked at properly, but what they were about. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. David.
Yes, Chair, absolutely happy to do that further analysis, so that we're not just looking at the provisions that were cited within the original complaint, but we'll break that down into some provisions that were upheld into this day, any complaints that moved beyond that initial assessment.
Thank you, David. And Robin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, two things. First of all, the town council that area that I live in, I know to the frustration of the clerk, I think two of these complaints relates to one of our town councillors, and they the recommendation was further training, and the council refused to attend. And I just wonder what we can do as the sort of central body to perhaps assist town and parish councils when the councillor effectively refuses the sanction that has been recommended by the determination. And secondly, because we were worrying, working so much pre-vesting day about, the level of complaints and whether we had that natural resources, do we have to feel now retrospectively, or perhaps the previous year's data, pre-vesting day, if we added all the district council data up, how does that compare to what we're dealing with as the unitary now, compared to what the individual district councils plus the county council dealing with before? Have we had a sort of sudden marked drop off, or a sudden massive spike, or is it kind of roughly business as usual kind of thing? I suspect it varied across the patch. I know in Mendip, there was pretty low level of complaints received as a district council. But I think it'd be interesting to know as an aggregated figure, just, are we just on a trend, or are we, is it all suddenly changed now we're unitary kind of thing? Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. David.
Yes, taking your second point first, so we did that analysis pre-vesting day from the monitoring officers from the 5 legacy councils, looking at our numbers of complaints and doing a really simple arithmetic as to what we anticipated level of complaints would be coming forward to the new unitary council, bearing in mind the number of district councillors were lost, but the number of unitary or county councillors doubled.
Yeah.
So we tried to balance that out. And I think we were all a little bit apprehensive when we had that May figure, 22 complaints in 1 month, that we were going to go above what we predicted in expectations. But I think we should see it balanced out. That was much more of an exceptional month. And then when we look at it as a whole, we are much closer to what we had predicted. I think we're also aware that sometimes occasions we get multiple or repeat complaints from similar sources or similar councils, and that themselves can skew the results. The results potential that happens at certain points in time. And so overall, I think taking all those factors into account, we're quite comfortable as to the level of complaints that we've received, and don't see any real exceptions or causes for concern to what we predicted the levels would be. Coming back to your first point, as to what we can do when a councillor refuses to engage with the process. If it's a Somerset councillor, then yes, that can come back to the standards committee and we can make further recommendations and activity. If it's a city, town or parish councillor, then it's simply a recommendation to that separate sovereign body to apply those sanctions or to arrange that training. If the member refuses to engage, then it's really down to the council as to how they would intend to address that. They may choose, it's within their ability to restrict the membership of committees and boards that that individual councillor has, or to introduce some other sanctions within their standing orders that might be available to them. It can also lead to follow-up complaints that come back through the code of conduct or standards practice. If that's applicable as a provision within the individual council's code of conduct, and we can look at it again. But the sanctions ultimately would be the same that we tried to apply or recommended the first time. But it's if an individual councillor wants to take that course of action, take that line of action, they're liable to criticism, they're liable to the bad press, that could be exactly what we want as well. So we just have to take the stance and then.
Thank you, David. Robin, are you happy with those answers?
Yeah.
Any actions that we need to pick up, or are you happy with the answers?
Yeah, happy.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the monitoring officer? Thank you, David. Shall we move on to your quarterly update, please? Item 6.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, this is a very similar format to the report you've just looked at. So this is looking at quarter 1 for 24-25. So again, members will see we've received 28 complaints in the first 3 months of this year, albeit that only applies to 23 incidents. So we had multiple complaints about 2 or 3 of the incidents that we've identified. So again, a little bit of a spike in June, so numbers about 7, 8 in April, May, and about a jump in June, albeit only 9 incidents. So again, multiple complaints about single incidents. In respect of our acknowledgement target, we've met that 100% at the time within those 5 days so far. Again, substantive responses is lower than that at 54%. And actually, because we're quite early in the year, 15 of those 28 complaints are still under consideration, so they haven't been concluded yet. And I know for a fact that one of the complaints relates to potential criminal activity, and the police are involved, so we're waiting on a substantive response from the police. So that introduces another factor which is outside of our control in terms of meeting that date. Again, of the 13 that have completed their assessment process, 11 concluded no further action was required. 1 resulted in local resolution, which was agreed, and 1 has been referred for formal investigation. So there is a potential that we may need, if the breach is found as a result of that formal investigation, we may require a hearing panel for that or a complaint, which I would anticipate will come forward in the following months. Again, a similar spread of the provisions that were cited in the complaints around disrespect, bringing council into disrepute, and the use of position to disadvantage. But again, we can break that down further as we go throughout the year and receive more complaints. Happy to take on board the comments that the panel made on the retrospective, the 23-24 annual report, and introduce those provisions and introduce those areas into future quarterly reports. So again, that's a source of complaints. breakdown as to whether it's a councillor, member of public staff, etc. And again, the areas of the code that are cited and identified and complaints that have been upheld. So doing that further analysis and further drilling down into those figures moving forward. So happy to commit to that for the Q2 24-25 report moving forward.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David on the quarterly update? Francis?
Apologies, I can't count. I counted 20 councillors when I and 50 members of the public. Right, it's 11 councillors, so it is still. I'm glad to see more members of the public than councillors complaining about each other. But nevertheless, I think that the point is still stands. It's still quite a lot of them. My real question is there a better way of we have one complaint from a member of staff. In most walks of life, you look for HR guidance, help if necessary. Is there something about HR processes rather than standards ones, or am I barking up the wrong tree? I don't know, just a question.
Well, it's a fair point. It's a point that has some case history to it in terms of Ledbury case, whereby I think within the court they made it quite clear that there's two separate processes, and you can't deal with a staff standards complaint through an internal HR process, or vice versa. So you do have to run both processes. Some will be appropriate for both, some will be appropriate for one or the other. It's just making sure that we have that, we undertake that assessment early doors and don't use the incorrect channel to assess complaints as to when they come in.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. David Smith.
Yes, so just looking at the slide allocation. Sorry, excuse me, Chair. I was just looking at the slide allocated between councils actually, and significance. I think 12 hours voted to one council, where the others altogether were only 16, but all the other cases were 16. So, I don't think we should just look at the number of cases, but the amount of time it takes for the governors. Your staff.
Thank you, David. Do you want to respond to that, David? Mark?
No, I think it's fair observation. And as we discussed in the pre-meet, there is some concerns about resources and disproportionate impact that individual councils may be having if they are the source of multiple complaints. So there is a bit of a proactive approach being proposed as to how we can address that rather than let it continue without any form of check or intervention.
Thank you, David. And we also discussed getting into more detail within the priority groups, perhaps in our early workshop, which we'll come back to later on. So I think it is an important area of how we actually put together training packages in terms of the areas we need to address. Thank you, David. Have I got anybody else? Robin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, on Francis's point, I mean, I'll come on to the point, sort of main point I was going to raise in a minute, but I mean, in terms of sort of identifying staff, I mean, actually, I think quite a few of the reports come from clerks, and that's, and that's not, I know that's not strictly staff, but that's a particular type of complaint, isn't it? If a clerk is lodging a complaint about a elected member within their organisation, I think that, to me, that's a different type of thing, isn't it? To a councillor, going on council. That was just an observation. The point I wanted to make was about the hearings. We, as you say, got a hearing coming up. I think from memory, when we had our first hearing under the unitary, the whole standards committee weren't on the circulation, effectively just the group who were the hearing panel were kind of informed about it, and we all found out about it retrospectively. And I think we discussed that at the time. I just wanted to sort of raise that again, that so that the whole committee can be aware that there is going to be a hearing and when it is, kind of thing, even though we're not involved, just so that in case somebody asks us about it, or just so that we've all got, you know, an eye on it. That would be my request. Thank you, Chair.
David, you got any comments on that?
Happy to commit to that. Yeah, absolutely. We'll ensure that all members of the committee are made aware, copied in the meeting, the hearing should be public, so that all the papers will be published, but obviously, I think a kind of proactive approach on it would be advisable and happy to commit to that. In terms of your first point around the clerk, yeah, it does strike something when the clerk is the sort of thing that suggests a breakdown in the relationship.
Yeah, you kind of get what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to say that the clerk is a member of staff, and often the only member of staff as well. So if they are, they're a source of complaint suggests symptomatic of a potentially wider issue in council function.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think it is important, and we did discuss this at the only hearing subcommittee that we had today, that all people were in the substance committee were informed of what's going on. Because whilst we may know the technical differences between us and our roles of authority, probably outside nobody does. So I think it's quite critical where that's going on. Thank you very much. So we'll make sure that happens. Thank you, David. So I just ask you to take those two reports together and note the comments that are in there, and that we adopt them into the minutes. Everybody's happy with that? Thank you very much. So moving on to item 7, which is the Standards Committee Objectives Work Programme and Priority Groups. There's only David Strip to give some feedback on this, but I asked David Clark to perhaps give a verbal update before that. Move on to David Strip with the P1 sort of comments from the meeting we had some time ago now. Priority Group 1, sorry. Is it on the note? Over to David Clark.
Thank you, Chair. As members will be aware, we've had an informal workshop this morning, so looking at future work programme for the committee. We've picked out a couple of areas of focus that I think the committee wish to look at, so we will formalise that in due course in respect of any allocations of tasks and timetable and work programme forward plan for the committee. It's really down to the committee how they wish to distribute that and the allocation of work to priority groups. And we kind of run out of time within the informal meeting, but happy to pick that up and support as far as we can from a sort of perspective.
Thank you, David. So we'll pick that up when we continue on the workshop, I think, later on, after this meeting's finished. But I'll pass on to David, who's got some feedback from P1 Priority Group 1 about the conversation we had there. Over to you, David.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. The work that we were doing just before the last time we met was around feedback from complainants, and this is looking at, and in fact, the introduction, the form was drafted, really to get the feedback on the process itself rather than the outcome. So, as an introductory piece, I'll just really quickly monitoring officer would value your feedback on the complaint process you've just been through, by the process itself rather than the outcome, whether you found that experience positive or negative. The questionnaire is intended to test the robustness of the process, make it easier for constituents to resolve issues they may have either with a council or subject council, city town and parish council. So the feedback last time, so there were effectively sort of two questions here. The feedback, I think, from Councillor Nicholson was that There is information that we already have on the system about the dates of responses and various things and when things happened. And that actually, it might be helpful that that is pre-populated and then keep it warm as short as possible to the complainer. So I did circulate some a form that has some amendments. So the amendments effectively highlighted the areas in red that possibly could be, the information could be taken from the system. So, but I think what we're interested in, from the discussion was really how easy it was to follow the process. So the process is obviously set out in the guidance. We put together a flow chart to make it more visually easy to read. And so it's really about saying, well, what did you use the website? Was the website helpful? Was the guidance helpful? And it's a multi-choice thing. So, and then just, asking them about were they getting on submitting the form and we received acknowledgement to the acknowledgement include the complaint reference number, the name of the officer, explanation of the complaints process. If your complaint demonstrated a training need for the counsellor against whom the complaint was made, we consult on the resolution. So it's really going through the points and then taking the points from the process map and from the process documents, guidance to say, did we follow that? Were they happy that we followed that? Was it easy to follow? Was the process easy to follow? And do they have any comments on the process? Any ways that we could make that process simple? And so for me, I think the background to this is that it can be a complicated process. When you first go onto the website, you then have to decide what the complaint is about. Where is the complaint about services of the council? Is it about, because if you go to, or is it a complaint against the council? This is specifically about complaints against the council, but you could go through a process where you complete the form thinking it's the right form, and actually then you find you filled in the form about services rather than council, and then you might just give up, or you might just be totally frustrated by the whole process. So it's about really figuring out, just getting feedback on, did the process work for you? If not, where did it fall over? And what we did for the role. So that's
Thank you, David. I'm aware that this your form, I don't think it's been part of the package that went out. So we may need to pick this one up with a public meeting. But just to review, the comments in red are the ones we feel additional comments are made in your form.
I think that the areas in red is information that probably we've got on the system anyway, but we could pre-populate. So I think my thought, Councillor Nicholson said that, why are we asking people for information that we've already got on the system? So my thought is that actually, if we can review a case based on this, we actually need that information. It's not that we don't need it, it's because it's on the system. It's actually, if the system can pre-populate this for us. From my perspective, if I was looking to review a case, I want all the information on 2 sides of a sheet, basically. So it's not that we don't need that information because we've already got it, but it's just how you present it. And if that information can be pre-populated through the system without somebody having to, and that makes a whole process a whole lot easier.
Thank you, David. I'll open it for comments around the room, starting with Francis, and then I'll go back to David for his comments.
Huge amount of work, thank you. and it's just to recognise it's always much harder to start with a blank piece of paper than it is to read it and make suggestions. So I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. Okay. I just wonder whether it would be helpful, rather than having a yes, no to was the form straightforward, to have how straightforward was it on a scale from of 1 to 5? Because a yes, no doesn't really tell you anything. And they may not fill in the comments, whereas a scale of 1 to 5 at least gives you some sort of, or something like that. The other one was the response time, the council officer responding rather than the automatic acknowledgement. I think the standard is 5 days, so I'm not sure that there's anything valuable in asking, did you get it earlier than that? And also might be raising expectations that they should have done. So maybe one of the things that I would find helpful and have found helpful in other parts of the council's work is, did you get it by the 5 days, which is the due date? If you didn't get it by the 5 days, how many days was it? Because there is a tendency, if something hasn't missed the deadline, let's keep up with the ones that haven't missed the deadline, and the one that has gets to the bottom of the pile. And I think that's something we'd quite like to avoid. So those are perhaps things that might be thought about. Otherwise, yeah, I can see that it's got to make sense to the person feeding back to us that they perceive in what they're filling in that we're getting something useful. But yes, let's not ask them for more than.
Thank you, Francis.
Sorry, Chair, can I just say it was a first tranche?
Absolutely. Hence my remarks.
Yes, I would just support your comments, Francis, that it is easier to comment on the form itself in front of you rather than to produce one from scratch. So thank you, Dave, for that. Missed my manners, but apologies for that. So bearing in mind the comments that are on here, would David like to comment on the issues that David Stripp has raised?
Just a number of quick comments, Chair, if we can. In the preamble, it talks about making it easier for constituents to resolve issues. I think that perhaps limits it. It could be any member of the public or someone outside of the ward division or even the county who could quite legitimately submit a complaint. Again, on that, in the preamble, it talks about Somerset officer, Somerset council officer. That's not part of the standards complaint process, so we considered to take that out of it. And again, on a similar theme, the right-hand box of that first row talks about an officer of Somerset council, city, town, parish council. So again, it's only elected members that are subject to the code of conduct complaint process. And I would wholeheartedly agree with the councillor Nicholson about the SLAs or the targets we already have in terms of acknowledgement, 5 days, 20 days. So the value of looking at 1 day to 3 days is agree with the points you made there. And on the issue of contact by telephone and how long will it take you to reach the appropriate council officer. Again, my concerns with that, if someone had been trying to reach me at 10 o'clock, I've been in this meeting for 2 hours, through no fault of my own, I haven't been able to take that call. But then that would come down as a kind of a negative point in terms of the response that goes back. So maybe we just need to, find another way. If you telephoned, were you able to identify the right officer? Was a message? If the ready to speak was a message delivered, and how long will it take them to respond? So it's getting a bit worried with something along those lines. Again, the two columns on the next page, the 2 rows on the next page, just going after that, target date and breaking it down into the more detail of the value of that. My final point is just on the third row on the second page, we talked about if your complaint demonstrates the training need, and the bottom one, where a breach of code of conduct is upheld or consulted on local resolution. I think we just need to have a think about that and make sure the wording's right as to the assessment process and the investigation process, if it's deemed necessary, and whether when local resolution actually enters into that timetable. And but I'm happy to work with you on that. So whether it's one query or two slightly different queries, we're not entirely sure. We can work on that. It's asking very similar things for this maybe like two different aspects of the process. But otherwise, I think that a lot of the other stuff are really good and valuable information. I think we would find helpful feedback.
Thank you, David. And thank you, David Strip, again for producing the form and the P1 members who were involved in that. So can I suggest a way forward is for David Clark to give you consideration and reply. David Strip with,
I'll email it through.
yeah, with comments. I think the other one I picked up was from Brad Francis, which was about having a graded scale of 1 to 5.
Yes, yeah.
As well. Does that cover all the points that people have raised about the form itself? The idea is to get some sort of feedback, obviously, in relation to more qualitative stuff, David. But we don't overegg it. David, would you like to?
It was just inquiring whether David felt he had enough feedback from today to make the updates or any updates or alterations first and then send it through, or would you like that to come back forward?
I'll make a few changes now, email you through a second draft.
Yeah.
And you can make any changes.
Sounds great.
Yes, David, could you copy everybody in on your second draft? So we're in the loop on each iteration.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, David.
Jack. Question, when it's in respect for the office, that the presentation called started explains that that person available, they could be on holiday anywhere. And so it wouldn't look so bad that it's strange that it was only the officers that were hard ones to get hold of. Now, I know that's a fact because they're everywhere, because of their size of their records individually, but it would be pleasing to know that they're already the receiver of the call explains to the person, because it looks like it's being deliberately blocked. You know, my mind swings that way into motion straight away. So I would chase things if I can find that people are available, fine. And you know, to return the call, that looks like a black mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Yes, I would hope that life could continue on if an officer wasn't available and the things would be addressed. Am I in vain hope of that? And that therefore there wouldn't be huge pressure on the officer just to keep everything going, but that things would carry on in their house and either holiday or meetings like this. But I'll ask the question to David.
Yeah, I think in this specific circumstances, we were dealing with conduct inquiries and monitoring officer inquiries, certainly within my out of office, whenever I'm on leave, I give to the council and customer services number, but specifically say if it's in relation to a monitoring officer inquiry, and this is the email address you need to send to. It's a central monitoring officer at Somerset.UK email inbox that I think 5 or 6 of us have access to. So there's always, that will always be picked up, either in respect of complaints that are sent directly or telephone messages or return call requests would all come into that inbox. So yeah, would recover and get picked up in that.
Good.
That address your question, Hugh?
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Hugh. Okay, thank you, David, for that. And I think the only other thing that's come to mind about the conversation we had is that obviously, if it's impossible to meet the deadlines that we set ourselves, that people are kept in the loop. That is, for example, the criminal case that they've identified, and maybe additional bodies that have to contribute with a situation which delays everything, but it's quite crucial that people are kept in the loop about that, and that their aspirations are realistic, as opposed to the dates that we set ourselves in most cases. Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the public session. What I'm going to suggest is we have a comfort break. Then it's coming up to,
Chair, before we do break, can we formally record thanks to Steve Taylor and good wishes for his retirement coming up in September?
you can, I did that right at the start of the meeting, but you can.
Absolutely, I'll do that.
He'd be very pleased to receive that, and I'm sure we'd all reiterate that.
Yeah.
In terms of Steve's help that we've had over the past year or two. Thank you, Alan, for raising that again. It's never, we can't thank people too frequently in terms of the work they put in behind the scenes. So that, can I suggest then, Carol, that we close the public session? It's 4 minutes to